Blood stained the Dakota Territory's sunset, as 13-year-old Elsie Ward huddled beneath an overturned wagon, her small body trembling uncontrollably. The stench of gunpowder and death hung in the air, like a suffocating shroud over what remained of the 15-wagon train. Just hours ago, these people had been family to her, singing around campfires, sharing hopes of new lives in the West. Now they lay scattered across the prairie, their dreams as lifeless as their bodies. Pressing her fist against her mouth, Elsie fought to control her ragged breathing as riders circled the massacre site. The paper clutched in her other hand, her mother's final gift, felt unnaturally heavy, weighted with blood and desperate promises. Find Chaska. Elizabeth Ward had whispered her life ebbing away as she pressed the sealed letter into her daughter's palm. Don't open it unless you have no other choice. If you must, memorize everything inside. Everything. Boots crunched on the hard-packed earth inches from Elsie's hiding place. She froze, pressing herself deeper into the shadows beneath the wagon. They make sure they're all dead. A commanding voice ordered Silas Judd, leader of the attack, his scarred face branded into Elsie's memory. Check every body. That map has to be here somewhere. We've turned out every pocket, Silas, another man complained. Searched every pack and compartment. Then search again. Judd's voice cracked like a bullwhip. I didn't come this far to walk away empty-handed. Elizabeth Ward would never travel without that map. The way he said her mother's name sent ice through Elsie's veins. Not just hatred, something deeper and more personal, almost intimate. As if he'd known her well. 15 years. Judd continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. 15 years I've waited to settle accounts with that woman. Now she's escaped me again. Maybe she didn't have the map after all, suggested one of his men. She had it. Judd's certainty was absolute. She'd never abandon our discovery, not after everything we sacrificed to find it. Our discovery. The words echoed in Elsie's mind, strange and jarring. What connection could this monster possibly have with her mother? A rifle butt prodded at something nearby Mr. Collins, who had taught Elsie to play checkers during evening rest stops. The outlaw spat tobacco juice that landed inches from her face. Nothing here, Silas, he called. Keep looking, Judd barked. That spring is worth more than all the gold in the Black Hills. Whoever controls that water controls everything in drought country. Darkness had fully descended when the outlaws finally departed, taking what valuables they could from the ravaged caravan. Only when the last hoofbeat faded into the distance did Elsie dare crawl from her hiding place, her legs nearly buckling as she tried to stand. The massacre site looked surreal in the moonlight, wagons reduced to splintered wood possessions scattered like forgotten dreams across the prairie. Bodies lay where they had fallen faces. She knew people who had become her second family during the long journey west. Fighting back tears, she found her father near their wagon, his army revolver still clutched in his lifeless hand. John Ward had died protecting his family, taking 2 of the attackers with him before being overwhelmed. Elsie knelt beside him gently, closing his staring eyes. I'll keep my promise, Pa, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'll find Chaska. From her father's body, she took his hunting knife and a small leather pouch he kept tied to his belt. From the wreckage of their wagon, she retrieved a water canteen and a handful of dried beef, pitifully inadequate supplies for the journey ahead, but all she could carry. As first light painted the eastern horizon, Elsie Ward stood at the edge of the massacre site, facing west toward the distant Black Hills. According to her mother's stories, the Lakota camps lay somewhere in that direction, at least 4 days' journey through hostile territory. She had no clear plan, only her mother's final wish and the blood-stained letter pressed against her heart. Taking one last look at what remained of her world, Elsie Ward began walking west. 3 days earlier, the Ward family wagon had traveled in the middle of the caravan, making steady progress through drought-stricken land. The once lush prairie had been transformed into a harsh landscape of withered grass and cracked earth. the result of 3 consecutive years without adequate rainfall. Elizabeth Ward sat beside her husband John on the wagon's seat, her needle working steadily to mend a tear in Elsie's spare dress. The girl herself sat cross-legged among their belongings, fidgeting with boredom. "Mama, tell me about Chaska again," Elsie had asked, seeking entertainment in her mother's stories. Elizabeth's hands stilled her expression, suddenly distant. She exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband before speaking. "That's a story for another time," she said quietly. "But you promised," Elsie persisted. "You said you saved his life once. Was he really as fierce as they say Lakota warriors are?" John Ward cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your mother doesn't like to revisit those days, Elsie." But Elizabeth sighed, setting aside her sewing. "It was 7 years ago during that terrible blizzard. We were among the first settlers in Blue Valley." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I found Chaska half frozen in the snow, injured during a conflict with soldiers. I hid him in our root cellar until he recovered enough to return to his people." What Elizabeth didn't say, what she had never revealed to her family, was the complex web of events that had led to that fateful encounter. Or how her casual mention of Chaska's location had later guided soldiers to his winter camp, resulting in the deaths of his brother and nephew. The guilt had haunted her ever since, compounded by secrets far older and darker. None of them noticed the scout riding alongside their wagon train, Silas Judd, his face permanently scarred from a Comanche attack years earlier. His eyes narrowed as he overheard Elizabeth's story, a dangerous recognition flickering in their depths. 2 seasons ago, while working as a surveyor's assistant, he had glimpsed Elizabeth consulting a map. Unlike any official survey chart, a map leading to what he believed was the legendary hidden spring that never ran dry, even in the worst droughts. That evening, as the wagon train made camp beside a muddy creek, Judd was summoned by the trail captain. "Your services won't be needed anymore, Judd," the captain said bluntly. "Items have been disappearing from wagons since you joined us. Mrs. Henderson's silver locket was found wrapped in your bandana, hidden in your saddlebag." Judd's scarred face darkened with barely contained rage. "I was framed. Elizabeth Ward saw you searching through their wagon yesterday when the family was at the creek," the captain continued. "She reported you seemed particularly interested in her husband's surveying documents." The mention of Elizabeth's name hit Judd like a physical blow. She had reported him again, choosing to stand against him after everything they had once been to each other. "You've got 1 hour to collect your pay and clear out," the captain said firmly. "Consider yourself lucky we're not turning you over to territorial authorities." As he rode away from the camp, Judd's thoughts turned to revenge and opportunity. Elizabeth still had that map, the map they had discovered together 15 years ago, before she had betrayed him for the educated surveyor with gentle hands and book learning. Now the wagon train would soon reach Fort Pierre, where his chance to reclaim what was rightfully his would be lost forever. By midnight, he'd gathered 6 desperate men from a nearby mining camp, promising them riches beyond imagination in exchange for their help in a simple raid. "We hit them at dawn," he told his newly formed gang. "No survivors, no witnesses." But his real focus was singular and personal Elizabeth Ward, and the map she had stolen from him years ago, the culmination of their blood-soaked expedition that had cost 8 lives to discover. She had taken everything from him then. Tonight, he would take everything from her. The attack came with the first light of day. Gunfire erupted from the surrounding ridges as families prepared their morning meals. Elizabeth had been tending their fire when the shooting started. She'd rushed to their wagon, retrieving a sealed envelope from a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. "Elsie." She'd screamed over the chaos, grabbing her daughter's arm. "Listen to me carefully. This letter is for Chaska, a Lakota warrior I once knew. It contains something very important, something men would kill for." "Mama, I'm scared," Elsie had cried as screams and gunshots filled the air. "If I don't survive, you must find him," Elizabeth continued desperately. He'll help you. And if you're in terrible danger, you can open the letter. But only then. Promise me, Elsie. Before the girl could respond, a rifle bullet struck Elizabeth in the back. She collapsed against their wagon wheel, blood blossoming across her dress, life ebbing from her eyes as she pressed the letter into her daughter's trembling hands. Promise, she whispered with her final breath. Now 4 days after the massacre, Elsie walked alone across the unforgiving prairie, her mother's final command driving her forward despite blistered feet and parched lips. The meager supplies she'd salvaged were nearly gone. The last of the dried beef consumed that morning, the water canteen holding barely half a cup of precious liquid. The landscape had grown increasingly desolate as she traveled west. Occasionally, she spotted distant riders silhouetted against the horizon, Judd and his men methodically searching the territory for her. Each time she would drop to the ground, pressing herself into whatever scant cover the prairie offered until the danger passed. On the afternoon of the 4th day, weakness and dehydration began to take their toll. Elsie's vision blurred her steps, becoming unsteady as she stumbled across the cracked earth. When she spotted a dry creek bed cutting across her path, she followed it instinctively, remembering her father's lessons about how, even in drought, moisture might remain beneath the surface of such formations. Dig where the plants still show green, John Ward had taught her. Water finds a way, even in the worst conditions. Falling to her knees, Elsie began scraping at the soil where a stubborn cluster of rushes still showed signs of life. The surface was bone dry, but as she dug deeper, the earth became damp. After 15 minutes of desperate effort, a small puddle of muddy water formed at the bottom of her crude well. It wasn't much, but it would keep her alive another day. As she waited for the sediment to settle, Elsie heard something that turned her blood to ice at the distant thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Scrambling up the bank of the creek bed, she peered cautiously over the edge and spotted 7 riders moving directly toward her position. Judd's men had found her trail. Heart hammering against her ribs, Elsie looked frantically for somewhere to hide, but the exposed creek bed offered little concealment. The riders were less than a half-mile away now, moving steadily closer. In desperation, she slid back down the bank and spotted a narrow fissure in the creek wall, an erosion crack barely wide enough for her slender frame. Squeezing into the tight space, she pressed herself as far back as possible, praying the shadows would conceal her presence. Moments later, the riders reached the creek, their horses' hooves sending cascades of dirt down the embankment. "She's been here," Judd's voice called out. "Fresh digging, can't be more than an hour old." "Girl knows her survival skills," another man commented. "Most folks would have died of thirst by now." John Ward taught his daughter well. Judd replied, a note of grudging respect in his tone. "But it won't save her. Spread out. Check every hole and crevice along this wash. She can't have gone far." Boots scraped on stone as the outlaws dismounted, beginning a methodical search of the creek bed. Elsie pressed herself deeper into the fissure, scarcely daring to breathe as a shadow fell across the narrow opening. Someone was standing directly outside her hiding place. "Hey, Silas," the man called. "What's so special about this map anyway? Why massacre a whole wagon train for a piece of paper? Because it's not just any map." Judd replied, his voice closer now. "It shows the location of an underground spring, a massive reservoir that never runs dry, even in the worst drought. Control that water source, and you control every ranch, farm, and settlement for 100 miles. "How'd you know this Ward woman had such a thing?" A harsh laugh. "Because we found it together 15 years ago. Before she decided John Ward was a better prospect than me. Before she stole what was rightfully mine and disappeared." The revelation hit Elsie like a physical blow. Her mother and Judd had known each other, had worked together to find the spring. What other secrets had Elizabeth kept from her family? "Check that crack in the wall," Judd ordered suddenly. "It's big enough for a child to hide in." The shadow darkened as someone bent to peer into the fissure. Elsie held her breath, pressing herself against the stone, willing herself to become invisible in the darkness. A bearded face appeared at the opening eyes, squinting as they adjusted to the dim light. For an eternal moment, their gazes locked. Elsie saw the recognition dawn in the man's eyes, followed by something unexpected, a flicker of hesitation. "Nothing in there," he called out, straightening up. "Just shadows." Elsie remained frozen in disbelief as the outlaws continued their search elsewhere. Why had the man lied? Perhaps even among Judd's gang there were lines some wouldn't cross, like murdering a child in cold blood. "She's not here," someone finally reported. "Must have moved on already." "Then we keep searching," Judd insisted. "She's heading for Lakota territory. There's only one route through those hills ahead that has water. We'll cut her off there." The men remounted their horses' hooves, thundering away as they continued their pursuit. Only when silence had returned to the creek bed did Elsie dare emerge from her hiding place, legs trembling from both fear and cramped confinement. Night was approaching, bringing the relative safety of darkness. Despite her exhaustion, Elsie knew she couldn't remain in the creek bed. Judd was right about one thing. There was only one logical route through the rugged country ahead, and that's where they would be waiting. She would have to find another way. Her father's surveying lessons came back to her as she studied the terrain in the fading light. John Ward had taught her to read the land, to look for alternative passages that others might miss. "Well, water always finds a path," he told her. "And where water can go, people can follow." Following this principle, Elsie spent the night working her way along a barely visible game trail that climbed steadily into the foothills. The route was treacherous, in places narrow ledges above steep drops, loose scree that shifted underfoot. But it offered what she needed most, a way forward that Judd wouldn't anticipate. Dawn found her high above the expected route, looking down on the narrow pass where Judd's men had indeed set their ambush. From her elevated position, she could see them clearly, 4 men with rifles positioned to command the entire passage. Had she taken the obvious path, she would have walked directly into their trap. For 2 more days, Elsie continued her precarious journey through the high country, conserving her dwindling supplies and moving only when necessary. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as she entered the Black Hills, a land of towering pines, hidden valleys, and maze-like canyons. It was beautiful in its wild way, but also deeply intimidating to a girl who had spent most of her life on gentler landscapes. On the morning of the 7th day since the massacre disaster struck, while descending a steep slope, loose shale gave way beneath her feet, sending her tumbling down the hillside. Pain exploded through her ankle as she came to rest at the bottom, the breath knocked from her lungs. When she tried to stand, her leg crumpled beneath her. The ankle was badly sprained, possibly broken. Despair washed over her as she realized the implications. Without mobility, her chances of survival, already slim, dropped to nearly nothing. But surrender wasn't in Elsie Ward's nature. Using a sturdy branch as a makeshift crutch, she forced herself upright and continued her painful journey, one agonizing step at a time. Her father's voice seemed to echo in her mind. "Wards don't quit, Elsie girl. We find a way or make one." By mid-afternoon, she had managed perhaps 2 miles, a pitiful distance under normal circumstances, but a triumph of will given her condition. The pain in her ankle had settled into a persistent throb that flared into agony with each step. Worse, she had seen no water source since leaving the higher elevations. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Elsie spotted something that made her heart leap, a thin column of smoke rising from a sheltered valley ahead. The smoke was too controlled to be a wildfire, too small for a settler's homestead. It had to be a camp of some kind. Hope warred with caution as she considered her options. The camp could belong to friendly travelers or hostile outlaws. It could be a native hunting party, perhaps even Lakota. Without knowing, approaching strangers meant risking everything. But remaining alone and injured meant certain death. Gathering her remaining strength, Elsie made her way carefully toward the valley, using every scrap of cover the landscape provided. When she reached the edge of a wooded slope overlooking the site, she concealed herself among the trees and observed the camp below. 3 conical teepees stood in a small clearing beside a stream, a temporary Lakota camp rather than a permanent village. Several women worked outside preparing food and tanning hides while children played nearby. 4 horses grazed in a natural corral formed by a bend in the stream. As Elsie watched, trying to decide how to approach, a twig snapped behind her. She whirled, losing her balance on her injured ankle, and found herself looking up at 3 mounted warriors. They had circled behind her position while she focused on the camp and now sat astride their horses with expressions of stone, regarding the injured white girl with unreadable eyes. Elsie's heart hammered against her ribs as she realized this moment would determine whether she lived or died. Straightening as best she could, she released her makeshift crutch and pulled the blood-stained letter from inside her dress. "Chaska," she said, her voice cracking from thirst and fear. "I need to find Chaska." The warriors exchanged glances, speaking rapidly in their own language. The leader, a tall man with a face lined by sun and wind, studied her with increased interest. "Why you seek Chaska Wasiku girl?" he asked in accented English. Elsie held up the letter with trembling hands. "From my mother, Elizabeth Ward. She saved his life once. Now I need his help." At the mention of Elizabeth's name, something shifted in the warriors' demeanor. After a brief consultation among themselves, the leader gestured for Elsie to approach. "You come, we take you." With their assistance, she mounted behind one of the warriors, clinging weakly to his waist as they descended toward the camp. The jolting gait of the horse sent spikes of pain through her injured ankle, but Elsie bit her lip to keep from crying out. These men were her only hope of fulfilling her mother's final wish. The camp's inhabitants gathered to stare as the warriors arrived with their unexpected guest. Women pulled children, closed their expressions wary as they regarded the dirty, bloodied white girl. An elderly woman emerged from the largest teepee, her face deeply lined, but her movements still vigorous. She spoke rapidly to the lead warrior, who explained in their language while gesturing toward Elsie and the letter she clutched. "I am Winona," the old woman said in surprisingly good English. "You are hurt, child." Elsie nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the accumulated exhaustion and pain of her journey. "My ankle. And everyone's dead. My whole family." Winona's expression softened with unexpected compassion. "Come. I will tend your wounds while we wait for Chaska to return from the hunt." Inside the healer's teepee, Elsie sank gratefully onto soft buffalo robes. The old woman examined her swollen ankle with practiced hands, mixing herbs for a poultice, while muttering to herself in Lakota. "Tell me of your mother," Winona said as she worked. She knew Chaska. Between winces of pain, Elsie related her story. The wagon train massacre, her mother's dying words, the desperate journey through the wilderness. She hesitated when she reached the part about Judd's connection to her mother, unsure how much to reveal, but decided honesty was her best chance for help. "The man who attacked us, Judd. He said he and my mother found the spring together years ago, before she met my father." Winona's hands stilled briefly. "The sacred water," she murmured. "Few know of this place. It has sustained my people during the worst droughts for generations beyond counting." "Is it real?" Elsie asked. "Very real. When all surface water fails, it flows still." The old woman bound Elsie's ankle with strips of soft buckskin. "Your mother knew of this place." "I think so. Judd seems certain she had a map showing where it is." "And now you carry this knowledge to Chaska," Winona concluded, glancing at the letter Elsie still held. "I don't know what's in it," Elsie admitted. "My mother made me promise not to open it unless I had no other choice." As evening approached, children began appearing at the entrance to Winona's teepee, drawn by curiosity about the white girl. They whispered among themselves in Lakota, their dark eyes wide with a mixture of fascination and wariness. One brave little girl finally ventured inside, speaking rapidly to Winona, before turning to study Elsie with frank interest. She asks if all Wazaku children have hair like fire. Winona translated with a gentle smile. Red hair is very rare among our people. What's your name? Elsie asked the child directly. The girl looked startled to be addressed, then broke into a shy grin. Zintkala, she said softly. That's a beautiful name. I'm Elsie. Soon, other children had gathered their initial caution, giving way to innocent curiosity. Through Winona's translations, they peppered Elsie with questions about the white world beyond the plains, about the great wagons that carried entire families across the territory, about strange Washiku customs they had heard of but never witnessed. Their chatter was interrupted by a commotion outside. Winona looked up with evident relief. Chaska returns, she announced, helping Elsie to her feet. Come. Leaning heavily on the old woman for support, Elsie limped outside to see a hunting party entering the camp. Their horses carried freshly killed deer, and the people called out joyful greetings to the successful hunters. At the head of the group rode a warrior, whose bearing marked him as a leader of men. Tall and powerfully built, with proud features that spoke of both strength and wisdom, he wore his black hair in 2 braids adorned with eagle feathers. Most striking was the jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a permanent reminder of past violence. This was Chaska, the man her mother had saved, the man who might now save her. As he dismounted, children ran to greet him, chattering excitedly in Lakota. He smiled at them with surprising gentleness for such a stern face, but his expression sobered when he noticed Elsie and Winona. Winona spoke rapidly to him in their language, gesturing toward Elsie and the letter she held. Chaska's face remained impassive, but Elsie saw recognition flicker in his eyes at the mention of Elizabeth Ward's name. He approached, slowly studying her with measured consideration. Elizabeth Ward, he said finally, his English careful but clear. The woman who found me dying in the snow. Elsie nodded, holding out the sealed letter with trembling hands. My mother is dead. Before she died, she told me to find you and give you this. Chaska accepted the letter, turning it over in his weathered hands as if weighing more than just paper and ink. How did she die? Our wagon train was attacked 7 days ago. Everyone was killed except me. Elsie's voice caught as the memories threatened to overwhelm her again. A man named Silas Judd led the attack. He was looking for a map. My mother had something about an underground spring. At the mention of Judd's name, Chaska's expression hardened. Without another word, he broke the letter's seal and unfolded it, his face growing increasingly troubled as he read its contents. The silence stretched unbearably as Chaska absorbed whatever revelations the letter contained. When he finally looked up, his eyes held a complex mixture of emotions, old pain, anger, and something that might have been understanding. Come, he said abruptly. This is not for all ears. He led her to his own teepee, larger than the others, and positioned at the camp's center. Inside, he gestured for her to sit on the buffalo robes arranged around a small fire pit. For a long moment, he studied the letter again, as if hoping its contents might somehow change upon second reading. Your mother writes of events I had not known. He began, his voice controlled but tense. Not just the raid that killed my family, but things from before, things I never suspected. He met Elsie's gaze directly. 15 years ago, your mother was not the woman you knew. She was younger, driven by ambition and the desire to make her mark in a man's world. She partnered with Silas Judd, then a man without scars, but already dangerous, to find the sacred spring my people have protected for generations. Elsie felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her. The image of her gentle, devoted mother as an ambitious explorer, working with a man like Judd, seemed impossible to reconcile. Your mother was a skilled surveyor in her own right, though women were not welcomed in that profession. Chaska continued. Judd provided protection and guides. Together, they followed rumors and old stories, searching for the water that never fails. He held up the letter, his expression grave. She writes that their expedition found the spring, but at terrible cost. 8 people died during their journey, including 4 Lakota, who tried to prevent them from reaching the sacred site. The revelation hit Elsie like a physical blow. Her mother, the woman who had taught her compassion and respect for all living things, had been complicit in deaths to find this spring. When they finally discovered the entrance, your mother realized the true extent of Judd's plans. Chaska continued. He didn't want to map the spring for scientific knowledge as she had believed. He wanted to control it, to own the water rights and sell access at exorbitant prices during drought years. So she betrayed him. Elsie whispered, understanding dawning. She took the map and left him. Chaska nodded. She stole the only copy of their map and disappeared. Met your father shortly after and began a new life, one of atonement, she writes. She never used the knowledge she had gained, never revealed the spring's location to anyone. He extracted a carefully folded paper from the envelope, a detailed map showing landmarks, distances, and directions leading to what appeared to be a hidden cave system. Accompanying the map were pages of Elizabeth's precise handwriting, explaining the approach, the hidden entrance, and the vast underground chamber beyond. She offers this knowledge now to my people, Chaska said. Along with her confession about the raid on our winter camp 7 years ago, how her careless words led soldiers to my family. The weight of her mother's secrets pressed on Elsie's chest, making it difficult to breathe. The woman who had raised her had carried these burdens alone, never sharing the darkness of her past, even with her husband and child. She asks my forgiveness. Chaska continued, his voice softening slightly. Not just for the raid, but for her part in desecrating the sacred spring, for the deaths her ambition helped cause. And she asks protection for you, the innocent, who bears none of her guilt. He studied Elsie thoughtfully. You will stay here until your ankle heals and you regain your strength. Then we will decide what comes next. As he rose to leave, Elsie found her voice. Chaska, will you forgive her? My mother. The warrior paused at the tipi entrance, his scarred face reflecting years of struggle with such questions. Forgiveness is not a simple gift to be granted in a moment, child. It is a path that must be walked step by step, often through difficult terrain. His eyes met hers with surprising gentleness. But your mother's final gift may save many lives. That is a worthy first step on such a journey. That night, as the camp settled into slumber, Elsie lay awake on the soft robes Winona had provided her mind, reeling from the revelations about her mother. Elizabeth Ward, the woman who had taught her to value honesty above all else, had hidden so much of herself from her family. Yet even as Elsie wrestled with this new understanding of her mother, a part of her felt closer to Elizabeth than ever before. She had been a complex woman capable of terrible mistakes, but also profound courage and sacrifice. She had spent years atoning for her youthful sins, and in the end had given everything to make things right. Driven by a need to fully understand her mother's legacy, Elsie limped quietly through the sleeping camp, returning to Chaska's teepee. The letter and map lay on a wooden chest where the warrior had placed them after showing them to the tribal elders. In the dim moonlight filtering through the smoke hole, she unfolded the papers and began to read. Elizabeth's familiar handwriting filled the pages, not just with confession and pleas for forgiveness, but with precise details about the spring's location and the approach routes. The attached map showed incredible detail, landmarks, distances, and compass directions leading to the hidden entrance. According to her mother's notes, the cave system extended for miles underground, centering on a vast chamber where a spring-fed lake provided unlimited fresh water, even in the worst droughts. As she studied the map, committing its details to memory as her mother had instructed, Elsie was startled by a sound outside, the low growl of dogs at the camp's perimeter, quickly joined by others. Within seconds, men's voices were calling out in alarm, and the night erupted in commotion. Hastily refolding the letter, she returned it to the chest and slipped outside. Warriors were rushing to defensive positions, while women gathered children and essential supplies, preparing for possible evacuation. Riders approaching, someone called in Lakota, the urgency needing no translation. Chaska appeared, his face grim in the flickering torchlight. "Judd and his men have found us," he said tersely. "They surround the camp." Terror lanced through Elsie's chest. How did they track me here? Like wolves following a blood trail. Chaska replied, pressing a small leather pouch into her hands. "Food and water. We must evacuate everyone to the hidden valley beyond the ridge." The camp transformed into controlled chaos as families abandoned most of their possessions, taking only what they could carry. Elsie watched with growing guilt as children were hurried toward a narrow ravine at the camp's rear, their eyes wide with fear. "This is my fault," she said. "They followed me here." "No," Chaska corrected firmly. "This is Judd's doing. He made his choices long ago, as did your mother. Now, we must make ours." A rifle shot cracked in the darkness, followed by a cry of pain. One of the Lakota sentries stumbled into camp, blood streaming from his shoulder. "Are they attack?" he gasped in Lakota. "Many guns." More shots rang out, bullets thudding into the ground and splintering lodge poles. The evacuation became more urgent as muzzle flashes appeared on the surrounding ridges. "Burn them out," Judd's voice commanded from the darkness. "Smoke them out of their holes." Flaming arrows arced through the night sky, landing among the teepees with deadly accuracy. The dry buffalo hides caught fire instantly, casting a hellish orange glow over the scene. Within minutes, half the camp was ablaze, cutting off the planned escape route. "Now this way," Chaska shouted, changing direction and leading the fleeing group toward a rocky outcropping. "There is another path." Elsie ran beside him, her injured ankle forgotten in the desperate flight for survival. Behind them, Judd's men advanced through the burning camp, shooting at anything that moved. The precious letter and map were secure in Chaska's shirt, but she knew it wasn't just the physical documents Judd wanted, it was the knowledge they contained. The group reached a narrow gap between towering boulders, the entrance to a hidden trail winding through the rocky landscape. As they passed through single file, Elsie glanced back to see Judd himself silhouetted against the burning camp, his scarred face twisted with savage triumph. Their eyes met across the distance, and his expression changed from general satisfaction to focused recognition. He had spotted her. Raising his rifle, he took careful aim, but Chaska pulled her through the gap, just as the shot rang out the bullet-chipping stone where her head had been moments before. The hidden trail descended steeply into a dry creek bed, cutting through the hills. The group moved as quickly as possible, but the elderly and children struggled over the rough terrain. Behind them, they could hear Judd's men giving chase, their shouts echoing off the stone walls as they discovered the escape route. "We cannot outrun them while protecting the vulnerable," Chaska said grimly. "We must divide. You and I will take a different path, draw them away from our people." "But the map," Elsie began, "is exactly why we must lead them away. Judd wants the spring for himself. He must be prevented from finding it at all costs." They separated from the main group at a fork in the creek bed, Chaska, giving rapid instructions to his second-in-command before leading Elsie onto a side trail that climbed back toward higher ground. The warrior moved with the fluid grace of one who knew every stone and shadow of this land, setting a pace that challenged Elsie's endurance, but kept them ahead of pursuit. As they crested a ridge, the full moon emerged from behind clouds, bathing the landscape in silver light. Below them spread a broad valley, cut by a river, swollen with recent mountain rains, their next obstacle. "Now we cross here," Chaska decided, pointing to a spot where the current appeared less violent. "The water will hide our scent and tracks." They had just started down the slope when bullets began kicking up dirt around them. 3 riders had appeared on the ridge behind them, Judd and 2 of his men, their horses lathered from hard pursuit. "There." Judd's voice carried clearly in the thin air. The girl and her savage protector don't let them reach the water. Elsie stumbled as a bullet whined past her ear, but Chaska caught her arm and kept her moving. More shots followed as they zigzagged down the slope, using every bit of available cover. One of Judd's men tumbled from his saddle when Chaska returned fire with a revolver taken from the camp, but the other two kept coming. The river's edge loomed ahead, dark water, moving with dangerous power, carrying debris torn from upstream banks. Logs and branches thrashed in the current like living things, deadly obstacles for anyone attempting to cross. "Stay close to me," Chaska commanded, grasping Elsie's hand firmly. "Do not let go no matter what happens." They plunged into the icy water together, the shock taking Elsie's breath away. The current immediately tried to sweep them downstream, its power far greater than it had appeared from above. Chaska tested each step carefully, feeling for solid footing on the rocky bottom. They were halfway across the water, chest deep on Elsie, when disaster struck. A massive cottonwood trunk torn loose by upstream flooding came rolling toward them in the current. "Look out!" Elsie screamed, but there was nowhere to dodge in the swift current. The trunk slammed into them with crushing force, breaking Chaska's grip and sending them both spinning beneath the surface. Elsie's world became a nightmare of churning water and disorientation. The current tumbled her like a leaf, slamming her against submerged rocks and tangling her clothes in debris. Her lungs burned for air as she fought desperately to reach the surface, the urge to breathe becoming nearly irresistible. Just when black spots began dancing before her eyes, her head broke the surface. She gulped air frantically before being dragged under again by the relentless current. This second submersion was even more terrifying. Her muscles were weakening, her mind becoming sluggish from oxygen deprivation. Strong hands seized her, suddenly hauling her upward. Chaska had somehow reached her in the chaotic waters, his arm locked around her chest as he fought toward the far shore. Together they battled the current inch by painful inch until they finally crawled onto the muddy bank and collapsed in exhaustion. The letter, Elsie gasped when she could speak again. "Is it safe?" Chaska checked his shirt, his expression shifting to alarm as he found the pocket empty. The waterproof packet containing Elizabeth's letter and the precious map was gone, torn away during their violent passage through the river. "The stuff," he said, the single word heavy with implications. Across the river, Judd and his remaining man had dismounted, searching for a crossing point. Even at a distance, their fury was evident as they realized their quarry had escaped the immediate trap. "They will find a way across," Chaska said grimly. "We must keep moving, and without the map." "I memorized it," Elsie interrupted. "Every landmark, every distance. My mother told me to if I had to open the letter. I can reproduce it if we reach safety." Chaska studied her with new respect. "Then our priority remains the same: stay alive and keep this knowledge from Judd." They pushed deeper into the rough country beyond the river, following game trails through increasingly rugged terrain. As dawn approached, they found themselves in a landscape of towering sandstone formations, a natural maze of narrow canyons and hidden passages that offered both concealment and defensive positions. "We can rest here," Chaska decided, indicating a shallow cave high on a canyon wall, accessible only by a precarious path. "They will not find us easily in this place." The cave provided temporary shelter, allowing them to dry their sodden clothing and assess their injuries. Elsie's ankle had swollen again after the river crossing, and both of them bore cuts and bruises from their battle with the current. "When we reach safety?" she asked as Chaska tended a deep gash on his forearm. "What will happen to the knowledge about the spring? Will your people use it?" The warrior's expression grew thoughtful. "The spring has always been sacred to the Lakota, a place of power not to be used lightly. But in these times of drought and hardship, it may become necessary for survival." He finished binding his wound. "Your mother's map would have helped us find one of the entrances that has been lost to memory. Without it, we must rely on what you remember. I remember everything, Elsie assured him. The twin buttes shaped like buffalo horns, and the lightning struck oak the canyon with walls of red stone. Every landmark and direction. Chaska nodded, but his expression remained troubled. The question is not just finding the spring, but what comes after. The Wasiku government grows more demanding each year, taking more land, restricting our movements. If they learn of the spring, they would take it, Elsie finished. Just as Judd wants to. Yes, water in drought country is power, perhaps the greatest power of all. The sound of distant voices interrupted their conversation. Chaska moved to the cave entrance, scanning the canyon below. They've crossed the river, he reported grimly. 4 men moving slowly along our trail. Judd is with them. Elsie joined him at the entrance, her heart sinking, as she spotted the familiar figures moving methodically through the canyon. They were following tracks left by water dripping from Chaska and Elsie's clothing after the river crossing. Now we're trapped, she whispered. If they find the path up to this cave, then we make our stand here, Chaska replied, checking his revolver. Only 2 bullets remained, not enough to hold off 4 determined men. Elsie studied the cave around them, her father's lessons on geology and rock formations surfacing in her mind. The sandstone walls showed signs of water erosion from centuries past, with stress fractures running through the ceiling. Look at those cracks, she said slowly. If we could bring down part of the entrance block their access. Chaska followed her gaze, his experienced eye assessing the formation. Possible, he admitted, but dangerous. If we miscalculate, we'll be buried alive, Elsie finished. But if we do nothing, Judd will eventually find us anyway. More voices echoed from below as the outlaws continued their search, moving inexorably closer to the base of their cliff. Time was running out. Working together, they began weakening the key support points near the cave entrance, using Chaska's knife to deepen existing cracks in the ancient stone. Small fragments rained down as the pressure points began to give way, but the main collapse would require more force. They were nearly ready when a shout from below froze them in place, their footprints leading up that slope. Judd and his men had found the path to their hiding place. Within minutes, they would reach the cave. Get to the rear passage, Chaska ordered, pointing to a narrow crevice at the back of the cave. I saw daylight through there earlier. It may lead to another exit. We go together or not at all, Elsie insisted. Before Chaska could argue, boots scraped on stone outside, the outlaws were ascending the path. With no time left for debate, they both retreated to the rear of the cave, positioning themselves near the crevice, while Chaska prepared to trigger the collapse. Silas Judd's voice reached them first, low and mocking. Come out, Elizabeth's girl. I know you're in there. Your mother stole what was rightfully mine 15 years ago. I won't let her daughter do the same. Chaska gave Elsie a silent signal to be ready, then called out, The map is gone, Judd. Lost in the river. A harsh laugh echoed off the stone walls. Do you think I'm a fool Elizabeth would have made sure her daughter memorized every detail? The girl is the map now. With those words, he stepped into the cave entrance, rifle raised. His scarred face twisted into a triumphant grin as he spotted them at the rear of the chamber. End of the trail, he said softly. Now you're going to tell me everything you know about the spring girl, or I'll put a bullet through your Lakota friend's head. Now, Chaska shouted, driving his full weight against the weakened support column. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like distant thunder, the ancient stone gave way. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceiling as the supports failed, sending chunks of sandstone crashing down. Judd fired wildly as the entrance collapsed, the bullet ricocheting off the wall inches from Elsie's head. Then he was gone, buried beneath the avalanche of stone and dust that sealed the cave mouth completely. In the sudden choking silence that followed, Elsie and Chaska found themselves trapped in what remained of the cave, a space now half its original size, dimly lit by what little daylight filtered through small gaps in the rubble. "Are they dead?" Elsie whispered, staring at the wall of debris that had been the entrance. Before Chaska could answer, a muffled voice came from beyond the collapse. "You've sealed your own tomb, you fools." Judd's fury was unmistakable, despite the barrier between them. "There's no way out of there." "He survived," Chaska observed grimly. "And he's right about one thing: we need to find another exit quickly. The air won't last long in this space." They turned their attention to the narrow crevice at the rear of the cave, their only hope for escape. Chaska explored it first, confirming that it widened slightly beyond the entrance and appeared to lead deeper into the rock formation. "I'll go first." Elsie volunteered, her smaller frame better suited to the tight passage. "You follow once I'm through the narrowest part." The crevice was barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, forcing her to turn sideways in places. Sharp edges of stone scraped against her skin as she inched forward, fighting claustrophobia in the suffocating darkness. Behind her, she could hear Chaska following his larger body, struggling with the confined space. After what seemed an eternity of crawling and twisting through the stone labyrinth, the passage began to widen, eventually opening into a larger chamber. Filtered sunlight illuminated this new space through small fissures in the distant ceiling, providing just enough light to see. What Elsie saw took her breath away. They had stumbled upon the sacred spring itself, a vast underground chamber housing a crystal-clear lake that stretched beyond the reach of their vision. Stalactites hung from the high ceiling, their reflected images perfectly mirrored in the still water below. The air was cool and fresh, carrying a faint mineral scent. "We found it," she whispered in awe. "Without even trying, we found my mother's spring." Chaska stood beside her, equally stunned by the discovery. "Not your mother's spring," he corrected gently. "The sacred water that has sustained my people since time began. Your mother rediscovered what had always been here." They made their way to the water's edge, where Chaska knelt to taste the pristine liquid. "Sweet and clean," he confirmed. This could sustain thousands through the worst droughts. As they explored the massive cavern, they discovered multiple passages leading away from the central chamber, some showing signs of ancient human visitation in the form of pictographs and stone markers. "These must be other entrances to the cave system," Chaska theorized. "Some known to my ancestors, others perhaps forgotten over time." Their exploration was interrupted by an ominous sound echoing through the chamber rocks, falling somewhere in the distance, followed by the unmistakable report of a rifle shot. "Judd." Elsie breathed, fear returning. "He's found another way in." They retreated behind a massive stalagmite formation, watching as a figure emerged from one of the side passages. Silas Judd, his clothing torn and filthy from crawling through the cave system, but his eyes burning with triumph as he surveyed the underground lake. "Found it at last," he announced to the empty cavern, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "Worth every drop of blood it cost." He walked to the water's edge, kneeling to drink from the pristine pool. As he did, 2 more men appeared from the passage behind him, and the last of his gang, equally battered but armed and dangerous. "It's everything you promised, Silas," one said, staring at the vast chamber in awe. "We'll be rich men controlling this." Judd straightened, a cold smile playing across his scarred face. "There's just one small problem, Carter. There is no we in my plan." Before the men could react, Judd's revolver barked twice. Both outlaws collapsed, their blood staining the ancient stone beside the sacred water, the latest sacrifices to Judd's obsession. From their hiding place, Elsie and Chaska watched in horror as Judd turned in a slow circle, surveying his prize. "I know you're in here somewhere," he called out, his voice echoing through the vast space. "No use hiding. This chamber has a dozen entrances, but only one of us knows the way back to the surface." He fired a shot into the darkness, the bullet ricocheting off stone with a whine. "Come out now, girl, and I might let you live. Your mother owed me this spring. You can help me claim it, or you can die here in the dark." Chaska and Elsie exchanged glances silently, assessing their options. The warrior had his knife and 2 bullets in his revolver, not much against an adversary who seemed to have a full cylinder and the advantage of position. "We need to separate," Elsie whispered. "Draw his attention in different directions." "Too dangerous," Chaska objected. "He'll pick us off one at a time." But Elsie was already studying the cavern with her surveyor's daughter's eye, noting details most would miss: the structural weaknesses in certain formations, the flow patterns in the ancient stone, the areas where water seepage had created instability over centuries. She pointed to a section of the ceiling where a massive stalactite formation hung precariously above the narrow strip of shore where Judd stood. "That entire section is barely holding. If we could bring it down." "How?" Chaska asked. "We have no way to reach it." Elsie's eyes went to the revolver in his hand. 2 bullets, aimed at the stress points where it connects to the ceiling. Chaska studied the formation with newfound understanding. "It might work, but I would need a clear shot and a distraction to keep Judd from shooting me first." "I'll be the distraction," Elsie decided. "He wants me alive to confirm the map details. He won't shoot to kill." Before Chaska could protest further, she slipped away, moving silently through the shadows around the cavern's perimeter. When she had positioned herself on the opposite side from Chaska, she took a deep breath and stepped into partial view. "Judd," she called, her voice echoing across the water. "My mother never told you the whole truth about this place." The outlaw whirled his revolver, tracking toward her voice. When he spotted her half-hidden figure, a predatory smile spread across his face. "Elizabeth's little girl," he said, moving in her direction. "Come to finish your mother's betrayal." "She didn't betray you," Elsie replied, taking another step into the light while keeping a stone column between them. "She saved you from yourself. This place was never meant to be controlled by one person." Judd's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Noble sentiments from a dying breed. Your mother had the same foolish ideas at the end. That's why she stole my map and ran. But the world doesn't reward nobility, girl. It rewards power and the will to use it." As he spoke, he continued advancing toward her, his attention fully fixed on the young girl he'd hunted for so long. He didn't notice Chaska silently moving to a position with a clear line of fire at the stalactite formation. "My mother saw what you really were." Elsie continued, deliberately provoking him to maintain his focus. "Not a visionary, just another thief trying to steal what belongs to everyone. She was mine." Judd snarled, his composure cracking as old wounds reopened. "Everything was ours together until she decided John Ward was a better prospect. She stole my discovery, my future, my life's work. The spring doesn't belong to anyone." Elsie insisted, her back now pressed against the cavern wall as Judd closed the distance between them. "That's what my mother finally understood." "Your mother understood nothing." Judd spat, raising his revolver to aim at her head. "And neither do you." The sharp crack of Chaska's revolver echoed through the chamber, followed instantly by a second shot. Both bullets struck their targets with remarkable precision, hitting the critical stress points where the massive stalactite connected to the ceiling. For one breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like breaking ice, the ancient formation began to separate from the ceiling. Judd looked up just as tons of stone broke free, plummeting toward him with unstoppable force. He managed one step backward before the stalactite crashed down, striking him a glancing blow that sent him tumbling into the sacred pool. The impact of the massive stone column sent shock waves through the water, creating waves that washed over the shore. More ominously, the collapse triggered secondary failures in the already unstable ceiling. Smaller fragments began raining down as the entire chamber shuddered. "The cave is coming down," Chaska shouted, rushing to Elsie's side. "We must find an exit now." They ran along the shore as more sections of the ceiling gave way, sending massive chunks of stone crashing into the lake. The sacred pool, undisturbed for centuries, now churned with waves and debris. From the water, a desperate voice called out, "Help me!" Judd had surfaced, blood streaming from a head wound, one arm hanging useless at his side. "I can't swim with this arm." Elsie hesitated, her instinct to help warring with the knowledge of all this man had done. Before she could decide, Judd's expression changed from desperation to malevolent determination. With his good arm, he drew a small Derringer pistol from his vest, a hidden backup weapon. "If I die here," he shouted, aiming directly at Elsie, "you're coming with me, Ward." Chaska lunged to shield her, but they both knew he wouldn't reach her in time. The Derringer's hammer fell with a metallic click, but no shot followed. The gunpowder had been soaked during Judd's immersion in the pool. In that moment of frustrated rage, Judd failed to notice the largest collapse. Yet a section of ceiling directly above him, giving way with a thunderous crack. The last thing Elsie saw was his upturned face, eyes widening in horrified realization, before tons of ancient stone crashed into the pool, sending a massive wave across the chamber. The wave hit Elsie and Chaska with stunning force, knocking them off their feet and washing them into one of the side passages. The current carried them deeper into the tunnel system, as more of the main chamber collapsed behind them, sealing that route permanently. Half drowned and completely disoriented, they were finally deposited in a smaller chamber where the water drained away through crevices in the floor. For several minutes, they could only lie gasping on the stone, grateful to be alive, as the sounds of destruction gradually faded into silence. "Do you think... is he..." Elsie finally managed to ask. "No one could survive that," Chaska replied grimly. "Judd has found his tomb with the sacred water he coveted for so long." When they had recovered enough strength to move, they explored their new surroundings, discovering they had been washed into a section of the cave system unfamiliar even to Chaska. With no other option, they followed the only passage leading away from the chamber, hoping it might eventually lead to the surface. The tunnel wound steadily upward, sometimes narrowing to the point where they had to crawl, while other times opening into small chambers decorated with ancient pictographs. After what seemed like hours of exhausting progress, they detected a faint freshening of the air, their first hint that an exit might be near. Eventually, the passage opened into a narrow fissure that admitted daylight. With final effort, they squeezed through the opening and emerged onto a forested hillside, miles from where they had entered the underground system. "We're alive," Elsie gasped, collapsing onto the sweet-smelling grass in exhaustion and relief. "Yes," Chaska agreed, scanning the surrounding area to get his bearings. "But the sacred spring is lost at least through that entrance. The collapse has sealed it forever." "Not forever," Elsie corrected. "I still remember the map. The other entrances my mother documented. When the time is right, your people can find their way back to the water." 3 weeks later, Elsie stood with Chaska at the entrance to a hidden valley in the Black Hills, watching as a column of blue uniformed cavalry approached under a white flag of truce. The Lakota had established their new camp near another entrance to the sacred spring, carefully concealed from outside eyes, but providing vital water during the continuing drought. The officer in charge, Colonel James Matthews, a veteran Indian fighter with hard eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness, dismounted and approached their small group with evident surprise at finding a white girl among the Lakota. "I am Colonel Matthews of the United States Army," he announced formally. "I've been sent to investigate reports of a massacre of the Ward wagon train and to locate any survivors." "I am Elsie Ward," she replied steadily, "the only survivor." The colonel's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. We had reports suggesting you might be detained here against your will. I'm authorized to return you to civilization, Miss Ward. Your mother's cousin in St. Louis has expressed willingness to take you in." Elsie glanced at Chaska, then back at the colonel. "I'm not detained, Colonel. I'm here by choice," Matthews frowned. Surely a young lady of your background would prefer to live among her own people? This is no place for a child of your upbringing. The Lakota saved my life when I had nowhere else to turn. Elsie responded firmly. They are my people now. The colonel's expression hardened as he turned his attention to Chaska. We've also received reports of a significant water source in this region, one that remains viable despite the drought. As representative of the territorial government, I'm instructed to investigate this resource for potential development. Tension rippled through the Lakota warriors at this statement. Chaska's face remained impassive, but Elsie could sense his alarm at how quickly the government had learned of the spring's existence. There are many small springs in these hills, he replied carefully. None large enough to interest the Wasakoo government. Our informants suggest otherwise. Matthews pressed. In fact, they spoke of an underground lake of considerable size, a resource that could transform settlement patterns throughout the territory if properly controlled. Elsie realized with a chill that someone from Judd's gang must have survived perhaps one of the men sent to ambush the main group of fleeing Lakota, and had reported the spring's existence to territorial authorities. "Muck, Colonel," she said, stepping forward. "I believe I can clarify this situation. The spring your informants mentioned was indeed real, but it no longer exists." Matthews studied her skeptically. "Water sources don't simply disappear, Miss Ward. This one did." She met his gaze steadily. "The cave system that housed it collapsed completely during our escape from the men who massacred my family. My mother was a surveyor. I saw enough to understand that the entire underground structure was destabilized. The water has found new channels dispersing into dozens of smaller seeps across the territory." The colonel's eyes narrowed as he considered her statement. "That's convenient." "It's the truth," Elsie insisted. "The man responsible for the massacre, Silas Judd, died in that collapse, along with the last of his gang. They're buried under tons of rock, along with any hope of controlling that water source." She was gambling that Matthews had no way to verify her claims without extensive exploration of the cave system, something the Army was unlikely to prioritize, based only on rumors and second-hand reports. After a long moment, the colonel nodded reluctantly. "I'll include your statement in my report. As for your situation here," he continued, glancing at the Lakota camp, "while unusual, it's not my primary concern. However, I should warn you that living among the natives means forfeiting certain protections and privileges of citizenship." "I understand," Elsie replied simply. As the soldiers prepared to depart, Matthews pulled Elsie aside for a final word. "This arrangement won't last forever, Miss Ward. The territory is changing rapidly. New settlements, new regulations. The days when tribes could maintain independent control of valuable land are ending." "Is that a threat, Colonel?" she asked quietly. "An observation," he corrected. "And a warning if you choose to see it that way. When the drought ends and settlers pour into this region, old arrangements will be reconsidered." With those ominous words, he remounted and led his men away, leaving Elsie and the Lakota to consider the implications of his visit. "He will return," Chaska said as they watched the dust cloud of the departing cavalry fade in the distance. "If not him, then others. The Wasakoo government has a long memory and endless hunger for land and resources." "Then we need to be prepared," Elsie replied. "Not just to protect the spring, but to use it as leverage for fair treatment of your people." That evening, as the Lakota Council gathered to discuss their next steps, Elsie sat beside Winona near the central fire. The old healer had become a mentor and friend, teaching her the medicinal uses of plants and the ways of Lakota life. "You walk between two worlds now." Winona observed her gnarled hands working a piece of soft buckskin. "Not fully Wasakoo anymore, not truly Lakota either." "Is that a bad thing?" Elsie asked. The old woman smiled, her face a map of wrinkles that spoke of long life and hard-won wisdom. "No," It is a rare gift to see through different eyes, to speak with different tongues. In days to come, such bridge-walkers may be needed more than warriors. From across the camp came the sound of children laughing as they played a game involving painted sticks and small stones. Among them was Zintkala, the little girl who had first approached Elsie in Winona's teepee. In the weeks since her arrival, the children had adopted her as a kind of older sister and story keeper, eager to learn about the outside world through her experiences. "Your mother's letter brought you to us," Winona continued thoughtfully. "A message carried in blood and sealed with sacrifice. But perhaps the true message was not the map it contained, but the journey it began." Chaska approached as the council meeting ended, his expression thoughtful but determined. "The elders have decided," he announced. "We will remain here through the winter, using the hidden entrance to the spring that you showed us. When spring comes, we will send word to other Lakota bands, share the water and the protection of these hills." "And if the army returns?" Elsie asked. "Then we negotiate from strength, not weakness," he replied. "Water gives life to all people, not just one. This is the wisdom your mother finally understood, the truth she died protecting." Later that night, as the camp settled into slumber beneath a canopy of stars, Elsie walked to a quiet spot overlooking the valley. In the distance, the Black Hills rose like ancient guardians, their forested slopes hiding the entrance to the sacred spring, the water that had cost so many lives, but might yet save many more. She thought of her mother, the complex, imperfect woman who had made terrible mistakes, but had spent her life atoning for them, who had partnered with a devil like Judd in her youth, but had found the courage to stand against him in the end, who had hidden her darkest secrets from her family, but had ultimately entrusted her daughter with the truth, believing Elsie would make better choices. "I understand now, Mama," she whispered to the star-filled sky. "Why you kept your secrets. Why you sent me to find Chaska. The spring doesn't belong to any one person or people. It's a trust, a responsibility." A cool breeze stirred her hair red, like her mother's had been carrying the scent of pine and sage from the hills. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, in this moment of hard-won peace, Elsie Ward felt her mother's presence and approval. She had delivered the letter. She had fulfilled her promise. And in doing so, she had found not just survival, but purpose, a bridge between worlds that desperately needed connection rather than conflict. The last surviving girl had become something her mother could never have predicted, but would surely have celebrated, a guardian of the sacred water, a keeper of truth and a voice for understanding in a land torn by distrust.